there was a real sense of like change is coming. It felt like it was coming off the back of these like awful tragedies, especially like as a young person. Yeah, I grew up in Margaret River, so are still prone to a lot of bushfires down there. And that was like a big sort of part of my childhood. I really remember those coming through and how it affected the community, being evacuated a couple of times. One in particular was like quite severe, and it burnt a lot of bushland, and some of my family lost their home. And so that was 2011. But I think what's interesting is like at that time, we weren't really talking about bushfires as connected to climate change. And so it really wasn't until maybe like the 2019-2020 summer when the fires on the East Coast were just really out of control and people lost their lives. Even though it was something maybe I'd always been aware of, I don't think it had really connected until that point. Before I joined, I was still involved, but not as part of a community. I was sort of more of an individual, and I'd go to protests sometimes by myself with my little sign, and I'd always find it really sort of emotional in a cathartic sense, being surrounded by people who cared, deeply enough to take time off work, study, to get onto the streets, to speak to power. And I sort of realized that it was that sense of being as part of a collective that was actually really helping me as an individual, but also that's how change is made. It's not made on an individual level, it's made as a community, as part of a collective, and I realised I really craved that connection as well. So that's what led me to AYCC. I feel overwhelmed by it all the time. And that has definitely been a big challenge. Like the climate movement was really at its peak then. And so there was a real sense of like change is coming. It felt like it was coming off the back of these like awful tragedies. And so I felt overwhelmed, but I remember feeling quite empowered at the time as well, especially like as a young person, seeing young people really leading that climate movement, I think was really beautiful. And being on the streets of Perth in the city and, the liveliness of the movement at the time was really quite inspirational. I can understand how it has become such a part of the mental health crisis as well, because it's really hard not to think, what is the future going to hold for us? We are struggling to make the changes that we need politically, and I think that feeling of helplessness, I think, has been a really big part of why I've struggled with sort of eco-anxiety and things like that, feeling like I'm just an individual, I can't change anything, but also knowing that my future is very much going to be impacted as it is now. Sometimes it can be so overwhelming that we end up paralysed, I think, by the anxiety that comes with that. But as soon as you take some form of action, and whether that is joining a group, as I think has been really beneficial to me, or it's just being able to like talk about it more openly with your friends and opening up about, those sorts of feelings, I think, taking action just makes such a difference because it puts yourself in motion. You're not just stuck with the feelings and the thoughts. You have some sort of outlet for it. I honestly think it's something that so many young people, whether they're really conscious of it or not, are experiencing. And I think it's completely valid. I just think not to make it all kind of about the system and the society that we live in, but I also think the system and the society we live in is based on capitalism and overconsumption, and kind of a disconnect with our environment and community has sort of created the foundations for something like climate change. But it's also created the foundations for feeling really disconnected with the way that we live our lives and feeling discontentment. And I think young people more than ever are going, why do we live our lives like this? And thinking about how we can kind of shift these sort of assumptions of what like life looks like, what a 9 to 5, working for 60 years of your life looks like, and sort of starting to challenge these like bigger kind of assumptions about what our lives